Welcome back, my friends, to yet another reading of Dome of the Rath. Chapter 6, Revelations of the Past. Rathbone's bright, gleaming, radiant, effulgent, dazzling, blazing, twinkling, shimmering dome was covered with a layer of viscous shiny sweat. As he wiped it with an NVHS code, he used his super knowledge to rack his beautiful brain to find out how to stop the witch. Him, Bertie, and Smithy were standing outside the hall doors as the demon herself struggled through the sea of skeleton warriors, destroying school property as she went. Rathbone realized he had no other choice. "I'll have to call him," he said quietly. Smithy turned back to Boner with a surprised look. "You can't. He'll destroy everything," Smithy exclaimed, the slight movement wobbling his massive stuffed belly back and forth. "I'm sorry, my love. This is the only way." Rathbone brushed past a confused-looking Bertram, who was watching the school get slowly destroyed by deadly eggplant rays. "Call who?" Bertie asked Boner on passing. Rathbone replied in a dark tone, "Brown." Jesus H. Brown himself was in a laboratory deep underground, not far from the School for Hairy Men. His ongoing research into cosmic necromancy would surely yield an answer to their escape from their earthly form. He was none the wiser to the horrible events unfolding above him, until he was contacted by Rathbone via dome phone. "Brown, I know I'm not supposed to interrupt you. However, it's been years, and the school needs you." Brown put down his stellar screwdriver and turned to the Rathbone hologram before him, the faint blue glow lighting up the dark underground lab. "Rathbone, you know that if I do this, we can never go back." Boner knew that if Brown were to unleash his ultimate power on the witch, they would risk losing the school forever. "Brown, we have no other choice." Rathbone fired a laser stream to his right, presumably at the witch, and turned back to Brown. "I see. I will be there immediately," Brown replied, and took off his white lab coat. Back at the school, the witch Taylor had developed a new strategy. "I'll get you, Bertram," she yelled over the sound of spooky, scary skeletons as she jumped up onto the roof of the school office. From up here, she could stay further from the army of impudent skeleton fiends and get at those wretched teachers. She pulled her 20-meter-long whip from her waist and cracked it in the dark night air. It echoed across the quad, and the spooky, scary music subsided, returning a deafening silence to the school. As the skeletons stood still looking up at Taylor on the roof, she began to speak. "I have orders from Supreme Lord White himself. You filthy men have run this school into the ground," she bellowed. "And I'm going to bring it back to its glory days." With that, she gave another crack of her massive brown whip, and was immediately crushed by a giant floating hand that flattened the office block. The entire building collapsed as the hand pushed down, palm outstretched, as if it were molding clay. It was as big as a Boeing 747, and looked as if it had belonged to a giant that had severed it long ago. Bertie's jaw was flat on the ground. He simply could not believe what he had just witnessed. The skeletons were gathered around a pile of debris that used to be the office, and something was moving underneath the rubble as the giant hand lifted back into the sky. Somehow, she was alive. She stood up dozily and looked at the great monolith above her. She pointed her palms at the hand and fired 2 blistering hot streams of eggplant juice. But instead of burning the hand, the juice simply bounced off and flew to the side, sizzling some of the skeletons around the debris pile. "Nani?" Taylor was confused, and launched out from underneath it and onto another roof, skeletons trailing behind. Out from behind the hand appeared to be a floating figure. It was hooded, carried a scythe, and wore a long black cape that flapped in the wind as he hovered above the hand. It was Brown. It had to be. "Brown!" Taylor shouted to the figure. "Brown, it's you!" The figure removed its hood and looked at her with all too familiar eyes. "Taylor, take 10 seconds to think about your actions." An old phrase he used to say while running the school took on a whole different meaning now. Suddenly, the figure was behind her. He had teleported and was now breathing down her neck. "Omae wa mou shindeiru," he said in a familiar voice, and raised his hand. She turned to see the giant hand moving toward her swiftly. Next to her, Brown's hand gripped at the air, and the giant hand above her suddenly gripped hers. He was controlling the massive hand with his own. Before she could react, she was hoisted into the air and thrust up and down, hanging on for her life. The giant hand was giving her a firm handshake. This was easily the most powerful handshake in history. Smithy wept at the beautiful sight developing before him. The ground began to shake, and the school blocks began to crumble under the immense shaking. Taylor's body, flailing up and down, was merely a silhouette now, as an immense yellow glow emanated from behind them. The sky was almost completely lit up, as streaks of pure white light fired in all directions, smashing pieces of the school. The rumbling was extremely intense now, and Bertie latched on to Smithy like a 3-year-old in fear, as his teeth seemed to shake right out of his skull. Suddenly, Brown's giant hand let go, and the witch was sent flying across the night sky over the horizon. The sky dimmed again as normal returned. Most buildings were intact, and hundreds of students slowly emerged to see what had happened. "What happened? Did Rathbone get a haircut?" one of them asked as they came out. Brown lowered down to the roof of P Block, and the giant hand flew away on his command. Brown was obviously distraught at the sight of his precious school in pieces, and flew off immediately. The smell of eggplant and plaster filled the air as Smithy and Bertie came to their senses. "All right, you filthy half-wits, back to sandwich making," Smithy yelled over his megaphone, and the mass of students collectively moaned as they slowly leaked back into the hall. The army of skeleton soldiers simply collapsed on the spot, their duty fulfilled, and bones lay scattered about the quad. "Bertram?" Smithy pried Bertie off him as he looked down his megaphone. Bertie turned to Boner. "The school is ruined, Rathbone. I thought Brown retired. How did he know the school was being attacked?" Bertie had a lot of questions, and most of them Rathbone couldn't answer. "This is the end of Hairy Boys, Hairy Men Academy," Rathbone said in a solemn tone. "White has returned. His short time at the school has left an impact on all of us. We defeated the witch, but at what cost?" 2 weeks later, the school was closed for good. The grounds were irreparable, and teaching was made impossible. Students were sent home and given a firm spank on the rump before they left the grounds. The students that ended up in the dungeon, of course, were left behind and forgotten about, because nobody likes a boy who cannot make a sandwich correctly. The teachers went into exile. The Order of the Hairy Men was out of action, it seemed. However, one sad, miserable, horrific, butt-spankingly eventful, frustratingly despicable, grim, misty, dark, rainy, cold, dreadful, gloomy, freezing, angry, stenchful, depressing, skullduggerous morning, things changed. Beef was being pummeled at the local sandwich shack known as Subway, where Rathbone the Bright worked. He had just finished a long, fruitful shift of back-breaking work. One of his employees got a code for incorrectly assembling his Long Island rib quarter pounder hatch flipped Dexter Downs sub, complete with extra shingles and a shimmy. He was just opening his Kobangwa action figure toy that came with the meal when the door suddenly opened. Bertie walked in with a solemn look pasted on his face.
Matthew.
Rathbone acknowledged Bertie as he approached the counter, stepping over the 12-meter-long sub spread across the floor. A military attack drone the size of a car landed gracefully in the car park, and Stapley stepped off it. As he walked into the shop, he did the whip nay-nay and sat at one of the tables. Bertie ran over to the table and attempted to kiss Stapley. Before Bertie could move in, Stapley pushed him away awkwardly, blushing deep as the tomato sauce he smeared on his toast that morning. Bertie backed off with a sad look on his face, a tear in the corner of his eye. Their relationship just hadn't gotten to that stage yet. Bertie had tried to take it further, but Stapley was a tough nut to crack, and it would take a lot more to get to the center. Rathbone walked over, still in bright green subway uniform. The warm morning light streamed through the store windows, and the aroma of Boner's sub filled their nostrils. Rathbone put a magazine on the table.
Here's your subscription to Pedo Planet, Bertram.
Bertie quickly snatched it off the table and opened it up.
Stapley, here's your nuclear missile codes and the parts you ordered.
A big parcel was put in front of Stapley, who gleamed with joy. Rathbone had been picking up their mail for months now, and this weekly meeting was the only physical contact the Order had with each other anymore, aside from Rathbone and Smithy's relationship.
I've received word that he is returning,
Rathbone said to the two, and Stapley and Bertie's mouths gaped open instantaneously.
It seems his trip around the world is coming to a close, and he'll be coming out of hiding to finally meet with the Order again.
This bombshell had come out of nowhere. The Order hadn't seen Brown in years, and the thought of him returning was daunting. Rathbone had told the Order he was on vacation around the world. What he hadn't told them was that this vacation was in reality a research trip to try and find a reverse to the cosmic spell Brown had cast eons ago. It had been years since he left the country, and Boner hadn't had contact with him since.
It's been so long, maybe he's finally forgiven himself for destroying the school,
Stapley said, with a distant look on his wrinkly face. All I know is that when he gets back, things are going to change. Bertram was right. The balance of power in the Order would now shift as their true leader returned to claim his throne. End of Chapter 6. Tune in next time for the final chapter of Dome of the Rath.